There are stories hidden in the most ordinary corners of life, stories that live in silence, in glances, in unspoken words. This one begins not with a prince in shining armor, but with a man carrying buckets, pushing a broom, and keeping a school clean while the rest of the world walked past him without a second thought. His name was Daniel. He was a janitor, the kind of man people barely noticed unless something was broken or dirty. He had calloused hands, worn shoes, and a quiet nature that made him blend into the background. But inside his chest lived a heart full of dreams, hopes, and something he had tried to hide for years. An unshakable love for someone who didn't even know the depth of his feelings. Every morning, Daniel would arrive at the school before the sun had fully risen. The hallways would be empty, and the smell of floor polish and chalk would linger in the air. He would clean the classrooms, fix broken desks, and prepare the space for the day ahead. By the time the students poured in with their laughter and noise, the place would shine, and no one thought about the man who had made it so. That was how it always was. The janitor was invisible, a shadow that worked in silence. But there was one person who made Daniel's heart race every time he saw her. Her name was Emily. She was a literature teacher, and unlike others, she had a presence that lit up the entire hallway when she walked through it. She wasn't just beautiful. She carried herself with kindness. She spoke softly, but her words had strength. She smiled at students, encouraged them when they struggled, and seemed to see more in people than they saw in themselves. And to Daniel, who had lived most of his life being unseen, Emily was like sunlight breaking into a room that had always been dark. He first noticed her years ago when she arrived as a new teacher. He remembered that moment clearly. She was carrying a stack of books, and some papers fell from her arms. While others walked past, Daniel had bent down and quietly gathered them. She thanked him with a genuine smile, the kind of smile that didn't make him feel like just the janitor, but like a man who mattered. From that day forward, Daniel found himself drawn to her, but he never dared to step closer. He watched from afar, swept the hallways when she walked by, and fixed things in her classroom without her ever asking. She would sometimes leave him little notes of gratitude, not knowing that he kept every single one of them, hidden in a box beneath his bed. Emily was everything Daniel thought he could never have. She was educated, graceful, and surrounded by colleagues who admired her. He was a man with little to his name, someone who had worked since he was a boy to survive. Life had been hard on him, and though he carried himself with dignity, he often felt the weight of not being enough. And so, he convinced himself that his feelings had to remain silent, tucked away in the quiet corners of his heart. But fate has a way of testing even the strongest silence. One afternoon, while repairing a broken window in Emily's classroom, Daniel overheard her speaking to another teacher. She spoke of loneliness, of how people often assumed her life was perfect, but how she went home to an empty apartment each night. She spoke of wishing someone would see her for who she really was, not just the image others admired. Daniel froze where he was standing, his hand gripping the screwdriver tightly. For the first time, he realized that Emily, too, longed to be seen, to be loved, to be cherished for the person she truly was. It was as if destiny whispered to him. Perhaps, just perhaps, their worlds weren't as far apart as he had always believed. That night, Daniel lay awake in his small apartment, staring at the ceiling. His heart was restless. He thought of her smile, of the way her eyes softened when she spoke to students, of her vulnerability when she believed no one was listening. And for the first time, Daniel began to wonder if his silence was a mistake. Love, after all, was not about wealth or status. Love was about seeing someone, truly seeing them, and Emily had already seen him in ways others never had. The days went on, and Daniel found himself paying even more attention to her. He noticed how she lingered in the library after hours, how she sometimes looked tired but tried to hide it behind her smile, how she carried a quiet sadness she never spoke about. And though he still kept his distance, his heart was no longer content with just watching from the shadows. He began to dream, not of grand gestures or fairy tale endings, but of small moments where he could make her life brighter, just as she had unknowingly made his. One morning, Emily arrived at school visibly upset. She tried to hide it, but Daniel saw the redness in her eyes. Later, when the hallway was empty, he left a small note on her desk. "You are stronger than you think. The world is better because of you." He signed it simply, "From someone who believes in you." He never intended for her to know it was him. It was enough just to lift her spirit. But when he saw her read the note, her lips forming a soft smile, Daniel felt something stir inside him. For the first time, he had reached across the distance, and it felt right. As weeks turned into months, Emily began to find more of these anonymous notes. Simple words of encouragement, reminders that she mattered, and little drawings of flowers or stars that Daniel would leave behind when no one was looking. To Emily, they became a mystery, a source of comfort on difficult days. To Daniel, they were his secret way of loving her, of giving without expecting anything in return. But secrets, no matter how carefully kept, have a way of coming to light. And Daniel's quiet acts of love would soon lead him down a path he never expected. One that would test his courage, his worth, and his belief in what he truly deserved. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are not the ones written in books, but the ones lived in the hidden corners of ordinary lives. The mysterious notes had become Emily's secret treasure. Each one carried with it a warmth she couldn't quite explain. In a world where people admired her for her poise, her teaching skills, or her outer appearance, these small pieces of paper touched something deeper. They spoke to her soul, reminded her that she was more than the expectations placed upon her shoulders. She began to look forward to them, searching her desk in the mornings or glancing around the hallway, wondering who this unseen encourager could be. She told no one about the notes. Not her colleagues, not her friends. They felt too personal, too precious to share. But quietly, deep within her, she longed to know the heart behind them. And though she didn't yet realize it, her eyes had already begun to notice things she had overlooked before. Daniel remained in the shadows, as he always had. He swept the floors, replaced light bulbs, tightened screws, and polished windows while others walked past him without a word. But now something had shifted. Emily began to see him. At first, it was just in passing. A small smile of acknowledgement, a soft thank you when he held a door open. But soon, she noticed more. How carefully he worked, how patient he was when a student asked him for help with something that wasn't his job, how he never complained even when the tasks were heavy. There was a gentleness in Daniel's movements, a quiet dignity in the way he carried himself. And though Emily didn't yet connect him to the notes, she began to feel a strange curiosity about him. He was different from the others. Where most teachers hurried through the halls, always pressed for time, Daniel moved with steady purpose, as if even the smallest task mattered. One evening, Emily stayed late to grade papers. The school was nearly empty, the hallways dimly lit. When she finally left her classroom, she found Daniel repairing a broken locker. His sleeves were rolled up, his brow damp with sweat, but there was no trace of frustration in his face. Instead, he hummed softly to himself, completely immersed in the work. Emily paused for a moment, watching quietly. Something about the scene touched her. Here was a man who asked for nothing, who gave of himself without expectation, who found meaning in the unnoticed. "Long day?" she asked softly. Daniel startled slightly, wiping his hands on a rag. "Oh yes, ma'am. Just trying to get this fixed before tomorrow. Students will need it." "You always seem to be fixing something," she said with a small smile. He chuckled quietly. "There's always something to fix in a school. It never really ends." Emily tilted her head, studying him. "Do you ever get tired of it?" Daniel looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment their eyes met. His heart raced, but his voice remained calm. "Work is work, but it matters. Even if no one notices, it matters." Those words lingered with Emily long after she went home that night. Even if no one notices, it matters. They were simple but powerful. In a world obsessed with recognition, here was a man who found value in the unseen. Over the next weeks, Emily found herself watching Daniel more often. She noticed the way he bent down to help a small child tie their shoe, the way he carried heavy boxes for elderly teachers, the way he swept the cafeteria floor with the same care as if he were painting a masterpiece. She began to wonder about his life outside of school. Did he have family? Did he live alone? What dreams did he hold inside that quiet heart of his? Daniel, meanwhile, continued leaving the notes, but now it became harder to hide his admiration. He longed to say more, to let her know the truth, that it was him, that he had loved her from the shadows for years. But fear held him back. He knew how the world worked. She was educated, refined, and admired. He was a janitor, a man who barely scraped by each month. What could he possibly offer her? Still, destiny kept weaving their paths together. One rainy afternoon, as Emily struggled to carry an armful of books and papers to her car, the wind ripped the umbrella from her hand and sent the papers flying across the parking lot. Daniel appeared suddenly, running into the rain without hesitation. He chased down the scattered papers, shielding them from puddles, his clothes soaked through. Emily laughed through the chaos, watching as he returned with the last of her papers in hand. "You didn't have to," she began. "Yes, I did," Daniel interrupted gently, handing them over with a smile. "Books and papers matter to you. That means they matter to me too." Emily felt her chest tighten. No one had ever said something like that to her before. She stood there in the rain, staring at the drenched janitor who looked at her with kindness so deep it was disarming. For a moment, she forgot about everything, the differences, the roles, the world's judgments. For a moment, she simply saw him. That night, Emily thought about Daniel more than she cared to admit. His words replayed in her mind. "That means they matter to me too." She realized that for years she had been surrounded by people who admired her accomplishments, but not many who truly cared about her heart. Daniel did, even if he didn't say it aloud. But Daniel's heart was in turmoil. He knew he was falling deeper with each passing day. He had promised himself he would keep his feelings hidden, that he would protect her from the weight of his unworthy love. And yet, every smile she gave him, every word she spoke, every small kindness drew him closer to the edge. The breaking point came one evening when Emily stayed late once again. Daniel was in the hallway fixing a broken light fixture when he heard a soft sound from her classroom. He hesitated, then peeked in. Emily sat at her desk, her head in her hands, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Daniel froze, torn between respect for her privacy and the ache in his chest at seeing her in pain. Finally, he stepped inside. "Miss Emily? Are you all right?" She quickly wiped her tears, forcing a smile. "I'm fine. Just a long day." But Daniel wasn't convinced. Something inside him, stronger than fear, made him take another step closer. "You don't have to pretend," he said softly. "Sometimes life is heavy, and it's okay to let it be heavy." Emily looked at him then, her defenses crumbling. "Do you ever feel like you're giving everything, but no one really sees you?" The words hit Daniel like lightning. For years, that had been his entire existence. He swallowed hard, his voice rough with honesty. "Every day. But I've learned something. Even if no one else sees you, that doesn't mean you're invisible. You matter. More than you know." The room was silent, the kind of silence that says everything words cannot. Emily's eyes softened, and for the first time, she saw Daniel not as the janitor, but as a man whose heart spoke truths she desperately needed to hear. That night, Emily couldn't sleep, and for the first time, she wondered if the mysterious notes that had comforted her all these months might somehow be connected to the quiet man with kind eyes and calloused hands. The days that followed were different for Emily. She carried on with her classes, her students, her grading, but her thoughts wandered more than ever before. Whenever she saw Daniel sweeping a hallway or carrying a ladder, her heart gave a strange flutter. It was confusing, unfamiliar, and yet she could not deny it. Something about him pulled her in, as though a quiet voice inside her whispered that he mattered more than she had ever realized. And then there were the notes. She had nearly forgotten them for a while, but now, each time she found a folded slip of paper tucked carefully on her desk, she read it with new eyes. She began to notice details, the handwriting steady but humble, the careful way the edges were folded, the faint trace of calluses on the paper's creases, as if written by hands that worked hard. Slowly, she began to suspect the truth, though part of her resisted. Could it really be Daniel? Could the man who quietly mopped the floors also be the one who had seen her soul more clearly than anyone else? One afternoon, Emily decided to test her suspicion. She lingered in her classroom after school, pretending to work on lesson plans. The hallways grew quieter as teachers left for the evening. She heard the familiar sounds of Daniel's cart rolling down the corridor, the squeak of wheels, the faint rattle of cleaning supplies. Her heart pounded. She wanted to know, but at the same time, she was afraid of what the truth might mean. The footsteps drew closer. She held her breath. Then, softly, almost like a prayer, a folded note slipped beneath her door. Emily's heart leapt. She waited until the footsteps faded before she picked it up, her hands trembling. She opened the paper and read, "Even in your hardest days, you shine brighter than you realize. Don't let the world convince you otherwise." Tears filled her eyes. The truth was undeniable now. It was Daniel. The man who spent his life unseen had seen her most deeply. The next morning, Emily couldn't stop glancing at him in the hallways. Daniel avoided her gaze, unaware that she now knew his secret. She watched the way he moved, the quiet rhythm of his work, and her heart ached with gratitude, but also with something more, something she hadn't expected. That evening, she found herself writing a note of her own. She hesitated, wondering if it was foolish, but she needed him to know. She folded the paper carefully and slipped it onto the seat of his cleaning cart while he wasn't looking. When Daniel discovered it, he almost didn't believe his eyes. He unfolded the paper slowly, his breath catching as he read her words. "Whoever you are, your kindness has touched me more than I can say. You remind me that I matter, even when I feel invisible. Thank you." Daniel's hands shook. He stared at the note, hardly daring to believe that Emily had written it for him. His chest burned with longing, but also with fear. Should he reveal himself? Or should he remain in the shadows, where it was safe? The struggle tore at him. At night, alone in his small apartment, he paced the floor, holding her note like a fragile treasure. His heart screamed to tell her everything, but his mind warned him of the truth. He was a janitor. She was a respected teacher. What could he possibly offer her? But fate has a way of pushing us forward when we least expect it. A week later, the school hosted a fundraiser. Parents, teachers, and staff gathered in the gymnasium, decorated with streamers and lights. Daniel, as always, worked quietly behind the scenes, setting up tables, arranging chairs, making sure everything ran smoothly. He didn't expect to be noticed. He never did. But Emily noticed. She watched him moving through the crowd, unseen by most, and her heart broke. She saw the way people brushed past him, not even glancing in his direction. And yet, she knew the truth. The man they ignored was the same man who had given her strength in her darkest nights. When her turn came to speak at the microphone, Emily made a decision. Her palms were sweaty, her voice shook, but she knew what she needed to do. "Tonight," she began, "we celebrate our school, our students, and the people who make this place what it is. But I want to say something about someone we don't often see. Someone whose presence is quiet, but whose impact is immeasurable." The crowd murmured, curious. Emily's eyes found Daniel across the room. He froze, his heart thundering in his chest. "There is a man here who works harder than anyone I know," Emily continued, her voice gaining strength. "He fixes what's broken, cleans what's messy, and shows kindness every single day, even when no one notices. He reminds me that the smallest acts of love are the greatest treasures. Tonight, I want to say thank you to Daniel." The gym fell silent. All eyes turned toward the man standing near the back, a broom still in his hand. Daniel's face flushed crimson. For a moment, he wished the ground would swallow him whole. But then, applause erupted. People clapped, some even stood, and for the first time in his life, Daniel was seen. Truly seen. Emily's eyes glistened with tears as she stepped down from the stage. She walked through the crowd and approached him directly, her heart pounding. Daniel could hardly breathe as she stopped in front of him. "You matter," she whispered softly, echoing the very words he had once spoken to her. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. He wanted to tell her everything. That it was him who had written the notes, that he had loved her from afar for years, that she was the light of his hidden world. But the words caught in his throat. Emily reached out and gently took the broom from his hand, setting it aside. "You don't have to hide anymore," she said, her voice trembling. In that moment, something broke inside Daniel. Not in pain, but in release. For so long, he had lived unseen, convinced that his heart had no place in the world. But here she was, standing before him, not just seeing him, but choosing him. The crowd faded into the background. The noise, the lights, the celebration. All of it disappeared. For Daniel and Emily, there was only this moment. And yet, the story was only beginning. Because while Daniel's secret was now exposed, the journey ahead would test them both. Society's judgments, their differences in status, the fears Daniel carried in his heart. All of these would rise as obstacles. But for the first time in his life, Daniel felt hope. Hope that love might bridge the gap between the world's expectations and the quiet truth of two hearts that had finally found each other. That night, as he lay in bed, clutching Emily's note in his hand, Daniel whispered to himself words he had never dared to believe. "Maybe I am enough. Love has a peculiar way of growing, often unnoticed, quietly weaving its roots into the soil of ordinary moments until one day it blossoms into something undeniable." For Daniel, the humble janitor, love for Clara had begun as admiration, respect for her kindness, her dedication to her students, and the light she carried wherever she went. But over time, that admiration had deepened, transformed into a quiet yearning, an ache in his heart every time she smiled at him, every time she treated him with the same dignity she offered to anyone, no matter their status. He never dreamed she could ever see him as more than the man with the mop and broom. Yet life has ways of surprising us when we least expect it. As the weeks passed after the fundraising concert, the school buzzed with energy. Daniel noticed subtle changes in Clara's demeanor. She lingered when they spoke, her eyes holding his just a little longer than before. Sometimes she asked questions about his life, questions that went beyond polite small talk. She wanted to know about his childhood, his favorite books, his dreams. He found himself opening up, telling her things he hadn't shared with anyone in years. And in her presence, he felt something he thought he had long lost: hope. One Friday evening, as the golden sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Clara approached Daniel in the empty hallway. Her hands clutched a small paper bag. "Daniel," she said softly, "I was wondering if you might join me for dinner tonight. Nothing fancy, just something simple. I made soup, and I have more than I can eat." His heart thudded in his chest. Dinner with Clara? He almost thought he'd misheard her. Dinner? With you? She smiled gently. "Yes, with me. Unless you already have plans." Plans? His evenings usually consisted of reheated leftovers, a worn-out book, and silence. But now, before him, stood the woman he'd secretly loved for years, inviting him into her world. He swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded. "I'd be honored." That evening, Daniel walked to Clara's small apartment just a few blocks from the school. She greeted him at the door, dressed not in her usual professional attire, but in a simple sweater and jeans. She looked radiant, her hair falling loosely around her shoulders. The apartment smelled of fresh herbs and garlic, and Daniel's stomach rumbled. They ate together at her kitchen table, laughing about the antics of her students, sharing stories from their pasts. Clara told him about her late parents and how she had pursued teaching because she wanted to give children the love and stability she had been given. Daniel, in turn, spoke about his own struggles, how he had once dreamed of studying engineering, but life had forced him down a different path, one filled with hard labor and disappointment. Yet, as he shared, he realized that for the first time he didn't feel ashamed of his story. Clara listened with such compassion, her eyes never judging, only understanding. When dinner was over, Clara poured them both tea and sat quietly across from him. There was a pause, the kind of silence that felt charged with meaning. She set her cup down and leaned forward slightly. "Daniel," she whispered, "do you know what I admire most about you?" He shook his head, stunned that she admired anything about him at all. "It's your heart, the way you care, the way you serve others without expecting anything in return. You see people, Daniel, truly see them. That's rare." Her words pierced through his defenses, leaving him vulnerable. He wanted to respond, to tell her what she meant to him, but his voice caught in his throat. He simply nodded, his eyes glistening with emotion. From that night onward, something changed between them. Their bond grew stronger, a thread of affection weaving itself into every interaction. Daniel found himself smiling more, and Clara seemed brighter whenever he was near. Yet even as happiness stirred in his heart, doubts remained. He was still the janitor. She was still the teacher. Society would see them as mismatched, unequal. He feared that his feelings might bring her ridicule, or worse, regret. One afternoon, as he swept the hall after classes, Daniel overheard two other teachers talking near the lounge. They spoke in hushed but sharp tones. "Have you noticed how much time Clara spends with the janitor?" one whispered. "Yes, it's odd. She could have anyone she wanted, and yet she wastes her energy on him. It's inappropriate." Their words sliced through him like knives. He gripped the broom tighter, forcing himself to keep sweeping as if he hadn't heard. But inside, the shame burned. He told himself he should keep his distance from Clara, protect her from gossip. After all, what did he have to offer her? But fate intervened once more. A week later, Clara fell ill. She fainted during class, and Daniel, who had been nearby fixing a window, rushed to her side. He carried her gently to the nurse's office, his heart pounding with fear. She was pale, her body trembling with weakness. He stayed by her side long after the nurse had gone, refusing to leave until she opened her eyes. When she finally stirred, she whispered his name. "Daniel, I'm here," he said softly, holding her hand. She smiled faintly. "I knew you would be." In that moment, he realized no gossip, no judgment from others mattered. What mattered was the bond between them, the unspoken love that had been growing stronger each day. Clara recovered quickly, and soon she was back in her classroom. But something had shifted. Daniel no longer fought against his feelings. He allowed himself to be present, to care for her, to show her kindness without hiding. And Clara, in turn, let her affection shine through small gestures. A hand on his arm, a smile meant only for him, a lingering glance. Yet their journey was far from over. Love may bloom, but it often faces storms before it can fully thrive. Daniel knew that if he wanted a future with Clara, he would have to face not only his own insecurities, but also the harsh judgments of the world around them. Still, for the first time in his life, he felt ready. Because love, when true, gives courage even to the most humble of hearts. The heart has a way of gathering strength when it's nurtured by hope. For Daniel, each day that passed with Clara brought him closer to a reality he had once only dared to dream about. Yet as their connection deepened, so too did the scrutiny. Whispered words in the hallways, fleeting stares from colleagues, and even the occasional disapproving glance from parents who thought a janitor had no business standing so close to a teacher. All of it threatened to weigh him down. But Clara, with her quiet resilience, never faltered. She walked beside him, unashamed, her presence alone giving him the courage to keep believing that love, in its truest form, cared nothing for titles or status. It was a rainy afternoon when Clara approached Daniel with an idea that would forever change the course of his life. He had just finished mopping the front entrance when she found him, her umbrella dripping as she stepped inside. "Daniel," she said with a spark in her eyes, "would you walk with me? I want to talk to you about something important." They strolled beneath the drizzle, the world muted by the soft rhythm of rain. Clara's voice carried both excitement and conviction as she shared her thoughts. "I've been watching you," she began. "Not just the way you work, but the way you care. You fix things no one else notices. You help the children without being asked. You stay late just to make sure the school feels safe. You have so much more to offer than sweeping floors." Daniel, have you ever thought about going back to school? About pursuing the dreams you left behind? The question caught him off guard. He looked down at his calloused hands, hands that had spent years scrubbing, lifting, and repairing. I used to dream of being an engineer, he admitted quietly. But life, it didn't turn out that way. I couldn't afford the education, and I had responsibilities that couldn't wait. Clara touched his arm gently. It's never too late. You're brilliant, Daniel. I see it in the way you solve problems, in how creative you are with the simplest tasks. The world needs minds like yours, and I'd like to help, if you'll let me. He stopped walking, staring at her with wide eyes. Help me? Clara, I couldn't ask that of you. You're not asking, she said firmly. I'm offering, because I believe in you, and because I want to see you live the life you were meant to have. Her words ignited something deep inside him, a flame he thought had long gone out. For years, Daniel had accepted that his place in the world was at the margins, cleaning up after others, invisible to most. But here was Clara, seeing him not as a janitor, but as a man with potential, with purpose. It was overwhelming, humbling, and exhilarating all at once. From that day forward, Daniel's life began to shift. With Clara's encouragement, he started attending evening classes at a local community college. The first time he walked into a classroom as a student again, he felt both terrified and alive. His hands trembled as he held a pencil, his mind rusty with formulas and theories long forgotten. But Clara sat with him on weekends, patiently helping him review, cheering him on every time he doubted himself. Their study sessions became treasured moments. Clara would brew tea, and they would sit side by side at her kitchen table, books spread out, laughter breaking through the stress of exams. Sometimes their hands brushed accidentally, and Daniel would feel a jolt of warmth, a reminder that their connection was growing beyond academics, beyond friendship. Meanwhile, the whispers at school grew louder. One afternoon, Daniel overheard two parents talking outside the principal's office. "Can you believe Clara is wasting her time with him?" one said. "She deserves someone of her own standing, not the janitor." Daniel's stomach tightened, but before he could slip away, Clara walked up, having heard the same words. She looked directly at the parents and said, her voice calm but firm, "Daniel is one of the kindest, most hardworking men I have ever known. He deserves respect, just like anyone else in this school." The parents were silenced, their faces flushing with embarrassment. Daniel's chest swelled with both pride and disbelief. Clara hadn't hidden her feelings, hadn't shied away from defending him. In that moment, he realized something powerful. Her love for him wasn't fragile or tentative. It was strong, fierce, and unwavering. As the months passed, Daniel's confidence grew. He excelled in his classes, surprising even himself. Clara continued to support him, but it was his determination, his long-suppressed hunger to learn, that carried him forward. The children at school began to look at him differently, too. They admired him, asking about his studies, cheering him on like he was one of their heroes. But it wasn't all easy. There were nights when Daniel felt exhausted, torn between work, school, and the weight of expectation. There were moments when doubt crept in, whispering that he wasn't enough, that he would fail. On those nights, Clara's words carried him through. "You are more than capable," she would say, cupping his face in her hands. "Don't let fear steal what you've worked so hard to reclaim." Their bond deepened into love, unspoken at first but undeniable in every glance, every shared silence, every act of care. Daniel no longer felt like the invisible janitor. With Clara by his side, he felt seen, valued, and cherished. One evening, after a particularly grueling week, Clara invited him to a quiet dinner. As they finished their meal, she reached across the table and took his hand. Her eyes held a vulnerability he had rarely seen in her. "Daniel," she said softly, "there's something I need you to know. I don't just believe in your potential. I believe in you. In us. I've tried to ignore it, but the truth is, I've fallen in love with you." The words hung in the air, filling him with shock and wonder. For years, he had loved her silently, believing it a secret that could never be spoken. And now, here she was, confessing the very truth his heart had carried. His voice trembled as he replied, Clara, I've loved you for so long. I never thought I could say it out loud, never thought I deserved to. But you've changed everything." She smiled through tears, and in that moment, Daniel felt the world around them fade away. The janitor and the teacher, two souls who had found each other against all odds, finally embraced the love that had been waiting to bloom. But their story was not yet complete. Life still held challenges, and the path ahead would test their love in ways they could not yet imagine. For while love had lifted them, the world would not easily let go of its judgments. And Daniel would have to prove, to himself, to others, and perhaps even to fate, that he was worthy not only of Clara's heart, but also of the dreams she had inspired him to chase. Yet in that moment, as they sat hand in hand, both knew one thing with absolute certainty. Their love was real, and it was strong enough to face whatever storms lay ahead. Because sometimes the most extraordinary love stories are born not in castles or riches, but in the quiet resilience of hearts that refuse to give up on one another. Love, once confessed, has a way of reshaping everything it touches. For Daniel and Clara, that single evening of honesty transformed their lives. Suddenly, the quiet moments of lingering glances and unspoken feelings were replaced by the warmth of shared affection. They no longer tiptoed around their emotions. They embraced them. And though the world around them didn't always approve, they walked forward together, bound by something deeper than circumstance. At the school, whispers continued, but Clara stood firmly by his side. Each time she reached for his hand in public or looked at him with tenderness, she dismantled another layer of judgment. The children, however, were different. They adored seeing Daniel smile, seeing Clara beam when he entered a room. To them, it wasn't strange or scandalous. It was a storybook come to life, proof that kindness and love could exist anywhere, even in the most unexpected places. Still, Daniel carried an internal battle. He feared that his past years spent cleaning floors, living in obscurity, might someday overshadow their future. Clara, sensing his doubt, reminded him often that his worth was not measured by the job he once held, but by the man he had always been. One day, months after they had first confessed their love, Clara surprised him with a gift. Inside a small, neatly wrapped box was a fountain pen, sleek and elegant. Engraved along its side were the words, "Write your future." Daniel held it in his hand, overcome with emotion. "Clara, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," she replied softly. "Yes to believing in yourself. Yes to building a future that matches the man I know you are." That pen became his companion through late nights of studying, through exams, and through the essays that challenged his every limit. It was more than a pen. It was a symbol of trust, of love, of the belief Clara had poured into him. As the years passed, Daniel didn't just finish his courses, he excelled. Professors admired his perseverance. Classmates looked up to him, and slowly, the man who once swept classrooms was now solving equations, designing models, and standing at the forefront of projects that required ingenuity and resilience. Clara never missed a step of his journey. She was there when he received his first scholarship. She was there, teary-eyed, when he stood on stage in a cap and gown, diploma in hand. The applause that roared through the auditorium that day was not just for his academic achievement, but for the triumph of a man who had dared to rise above expectations. After the ceremony, Daniel found Clara in the crowd. She threw her arms around him, whispering, "I knew you could do it." And with tears streaming down his face, Daniel whispered back, "I couldn't have done it without you." But their story didn't end with academic success. Daniel's talents carried him into a career that would astonish those who had once dismissed him. He became an engineer, designing sustainable systems for schools, ensuring that no child would ever have to learn in buildings that were falling apart. His first major project was renovating the very school where he had once been the janitor. The day the new plans were unveiled, Daniel stood at the front of the auditorium, addressing teachers, parents, and children. His voice was steady, confident, and filled with pride. "When I worked here years ago," he said, "I saw broken pipes, flickering lights, and hallways that needed care. I used to dream of fixing things on a larger scale. Today, I stand before you not as the janitor who once swept these floors, but as someone who will ensure these halls remain safe, strong, and worthy of the children who walk them. Dreams don't have deadlines, and worth is never defined by where you start. It's defined by the heart you carry as you keep moving forward. The room erupted in applause, but Daniel's eyes sought only Clara's. She stood at the back, her smile radiant, her love unwavering. In time, their love story blossomed into something even greater. One evening, under a canopy of stars, Daniel led Clara to the very courtyard where they had once shared their first walk in the rain. Nervously, he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "Clara," he began, his voice trembling. "For so long, you've been my light, my anchor, and my greatest blessing. You believed in me when no one else did, when even I couldn't believe in myself. I can't imagine a future without you. Will you marry me?" Her eyes filled with tears, and without hesitation, she whispered, "Yes, Daniel, 1,000 times yes." Their wedding was simple, intimate, and beautiful. Not a grand display of wealth or prestige, but a gathering of hearts that had witnessed their journey. Children from the school brought flowers. Parents came with genuine smiles, and colleagues who had once doubted now stood in awe. Daniel and Clara exchanged vows beneath an arch of wildflowers, promising to walk hand in hand no matter what storms might come. Years later, as they built a home filled with laughter, kindness, and purpose, people often asked Daniel what the secret to his success was. He always gave the same answer. The secret wasn't success. It was love. It was someone seeing in me what I couldn't see in myself. It was refusing to give up, not just on dreams, but on people. That's what changes everything. Their story became more than just their own. It became a testament whispered from one generation to the next, proof that love has the power to transform, that kindness has the power to heal, and that even the humblest beginnings can lead to extraordinary endings. Because in the end, Daniel and Clara's story was never really about a janitor and a teacher. It was about the courage to love against the odds, the resilience to rise above judgment, and the beauty of two souls who chose to walk through life together. And so, the man who had once swept the halls of a school found himself building a future filled with light, not because of the titles he earned or the accolades he received, but because he had discovered the greatest truth of all, that love, when nurtured with patience, sacrifice, and hope, can turn even the most ordinary life into something extraordinary.